I read the intro for this book for a theories and practices of counseling class way back in the college days, and I loved the prologue so much that I went out and I bought the rest of the book and didn't read it for years. Now, this book has no summary, it just does the quotes from reviews things, and the one on the front reads psychological thriller. Keep those words in mind. Now, this book was published in 1996 and takes place in around 1995, around in there. That's also really important to keep in mind because it talks a lot about things that, in my opinion, are pretty well established in today's day and age. I'd argue that this book is controversial. It seeks to explore the question, how far will you go to help a client? It goes without saying, but never sleep with your therapist. Okay, there you go. This book was written by Irvin D. Yalom. Irvin D. Yalom is a psychiatrist who practices psychotherapy, which is the therapy that Daddy Freud invented, and developed a form of therapy known as existential therapy. In existential psychotherapy, he developed 4 main themes: isolation, meaninglessness, mortality, and freedom. All of this stuff does indeed come into play in his book, Lying on the Couch. Irvin D. Yalom also really liked to explore the relationship between client and therapist, which it's pretty common knowledge now that the relationship between the therapist and the client is the #1 indicator of success when receiving therapy. But apparently back in the 90s, that was weird to think about, at least in the psychotherapy Daddy Freud arena. The prologue is about the case of a therapist named Seymour Trotter, who decided, at the behest of his client, to sleep with her. And it is through sleeping with her that he finds she's actually making breakthroughs. And this intrigues one of the main characters of the rest of the story, another therapist named Ernest Lash. The case of Seymour Trotter changes how Dr. Ernest Lash approaches therapy. Dr. Ernest Lash is a psychiatrist who uses psychotherapy. He is really heavily contemplating changing his approach to therapy and his approach to clients. And he decides to implement that new plan of self-disclosure with the very next client who walks through that door. And the very next client that walks through that door is our next main character, Carol Astrid. Carol Astrid is a well-known, fiercely respected, and quite possibly feared lawyer. Her now ex-husband Justin was seeking therapy from Ernest. And in their therapy, they were discussing Justin's marital dissatisfaction and ways that Justin could either improve the marriage or seek to leave it. Justin does eventually leave the marriage because he has an affair with another woman, and that other woman encourages him to move out, get out of the abusive marriage that Justin is in with Carol. And Carol is mad. She's pissed. This is not her Justin. Her Justin is far too cowardly to leave their marriage. So she is convinced that Ernest convinced Justin to leave Carol. So Carol seeks revenge against Ernest. Her plan for revenge is a sort of persona, close enough to her own that she doesn't have to lie through her teeth constantly, but far enough removed that it's not her exactly. That persona is going to seduce Dr. Ernest Lash. She is going to catch Ernest in sexual misconduct to ruin his career. Now, Carol has a basis for believing that Ernest will in fact sleep with her. Previous therapists of hers had expressed their desire in sleeping with her, and one of them followed through. So she believes that because of her prior experience with therapists, this therapist is not going to be any different. He he is going to sleep with Carol if she pursues him and seduces him. And it starts this really intriguing, almost cat and mouse game, where Carol takes on the role of deception and Ernest takes on the role of truth and honesty. Deception from the client's couch and truth from the therapist's chair. This book would have been great had the psychological thriller part of it been based on this conflict, on this game of cat and mouse, honesty, and deception. But there's a third character we have to introduce, Marshall. I hate Marshall. He is the most arrogant character I have ever read. He posits himself as the single best psychoanalyst that has ever roamed the earth. Only his interpretations can cure patients. Everyone else, every other psychotherapist is beneath him, incapable compared to his greatness. In fact, I'd argue that he might even put himself above the father of psychotherapy himself, Daddy Freud. For most of the story, Marshall's storylines feel extremely disjointed. He's off doing his own thing while Ernest and Carol are doing their game of cat and mouse, a really fascinating juxtaposition. So how does Marshall tie in? To begin, he is introduced as Ernest's supervisor. Ernest goes to Marshall to talk about clients, how he's dealing with them, and Marshall gives Ernest advice, kind of like a therapy session to help him out. Well, as the story progresses, Ernest is like, you know what? I'm done with Marshall. So this relationship doesn't exist anymore. It's irrelevant. It feels like just a basic, hey, Marshall's a character. But Marshall's storyline opens up on a board meeting in which they are voting what to do with a disgraced therapist. They claim that his therapeutic techniques, this disgraced therapist, has damaged his clients. So Marshall puts out the idea of running an ad, this was the 90s, an ad in the newspaper saying, hey, let's have recall therapy. You know, like you have a recall on a car? Hey, clients of this therapist, you are entitled to free therapy to reverse the damage that this therapist has done. He also works with a client who was in therapy only briefly with him, a man by the name of Peter. And Peter is dashing, wealthy, exotic. He'd been having some relational issues because his fiancée just couldn't marry him yet because of daddy issues. So they work through things, Marshall helps, and Peter, no longer impatient, inquires if he would be interested in an investment opportunity with a bicycle helmet startup. Marshall lays down $900,000 on this investment because Peter takes him into all these high-rise clubs and shows him the life that the truly wealthy could lead. And Marshall's hooked. This is obviously a scam, and watching this man be duped by his own arrogance and greed is honestly infuriating. Marshall works with a recall client, one of the clients that responded to the ad in the newspaper, a gambling addict named Shelley. And my perception of that is Shelley and Marshall's storyline only exists for a single line in the book. Second to last page, Shelley and a gambling friend named Willie have just finished playing a game. As Willie reached into his pocket for his wallet, he said, "Last two hands, you bluffed me out. This hand, you suck me in. What the hell is going on, Shelley? You taking lessons or something?" Shelley embraced his mountain of chips, pulled them closer, looked up and grinned. Yeah, lessons, you got it. It's like this. My shrink, a bona fide psychoanalyst, is giving me a few pointers. He totes his couch down every week to Avocado Joe's. It's just character growth, and it's really disappointing and unsatisfying. I know what it's doing. It's showing that this arrogant man has now rescinded on his arrogance and is willing to go down to a place with gambling addicts to help them, you know, figure out what their tells are when they're bluffing. Right? I get it, but I hate Marshall. So the book follows these three characters. Ernest as he sets out on his journey of honesty from the therapist's chair, Carol as she seeks to deceive and seduce Ernest from the client's couch, and Marshall as he gets swindled. As the story goes on, Ernest's therapy begins to work on Carol. Carol abandons her quest for revenge against Ernest and Justin and begins one of the healthiest relationships of her life. And Marshall gets swindled again by the same guy. So, beyond Marshall being Ernest's ex-supervisor, how does he fit in with all of this? Well, he goes to Carol for legal advice, legal consultation to get back the $900,000 that he was swindled out of. And Carol ends up therapizing Marshall. Even though she's legal consultation, she kind of turns into a pseudo-therapist for Marshall, showing him and guiding him to the conclusion that his arrogance and greed for money is really just a cover-up for all of his insecurities and fears. And Marshall does reach that conclusion. His arrogance, his greed, all of his faults and follies were simply his own insecurities and fears. And the book ends with honesty on the couch all around. It's a happy ending! So, what do I rate this book? 2 out of 5. It manages 2 stars because I am intrigued by the cat and mouse game, by this juxtaposition of lying on the client's couch and telling the truth from the therapist's chair. I really wish I had stuck with that, and honestly, I wish it had culminated in Mjolnir. It only gets 2 stars because I hate Marshall. From a human perspective, of course, I'm grateful that everyone experiences healing and improvement. But as a reader, I'm unsatisfied. This book was an exercise in realistic expectations, because when I read psychological thriller, I expected violence and sex. And what I got was a cat and mouse game that petered out and an extremely arrogant prick getting deservedly swindled. But that was boring to me. Approaching the book from a broader scope, I can appreciate the juxtapositions. Ernest's honesty against Carol's deception, and Marshall assuming that clients bring honesty and receiving deception and swindling. That is fascinating, but the ending left me incredibly unsatisfied. All in all, just read the prologue. That's the thought experiment. The rest of the book is just disappointment. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun YouTuber stuff, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye! In college for a counseling or this is going so bad, as the client will disclose. Woo! Knew that was gonna happen eventually. Single best psychoanalyst, I don't remember how I was saying. So the book follows these of honesty from the therapist's couch, from the client. Oh no, there's another couch portion? Oh, screw that. We're doing it from here. This video is a butt. Carol, what did I say? Blah, blah, blah. All that fun YouTuber stuff. Woo! I did this video was a lot of work, but also hopefully worth it. Ugh.